Marvel Snap's newest season features many of the dangerous assassins of the Black Order, but they're not the only cards in their Spotlight caches. So let's take a look at all of the cards in all of the Spotlight caches for the entire Black Order season in February. First up is Supergiant, available in the first of the Spotlight caches that will be available during the month of February. Supergiant is a 4-cost, 5-power card that has an on-reveal effect that prevents cards from being revealed the turn after she's played. This effect applies to both your opponent's cards and your cards. Now, the way she's going to work, in my view, is if she is good, it'll be because she shuts down a lot of powerful 5 energy plays. Of course, being a 4-cost card, she's mostly coming out on turn 4, although she can come out on turn 3, shutting down turn 4 plays like Loki if you play a Zabu. More on that later. However, the reliable method of using her is shutting down things like Jane Foster, Sarah, Leech. These are all cards that Supergiant is the natural enemy of. And because Supergiant is the natural enemy of these cards, and they are quite popular right now, that is an interesting space for this card to be in. Now, in order for that to actually work, well, you have to actually be playing her on turn 4, which is a bit of an issue. She is a 4/5, a lot smaller than most 4-cost cards you'd normally be playing. However, the things she is meant to target are also generally smaller than the 5-cost cards that are normally being played. Leech and Sarah, of course, much smaller than your average 5-cost card. However, I'm not sure that's going to happen as often as you want it to. The issue here is that you need to play Supergiant by turn 4, which means you need to have drawn it by turn 4, which means there's going to be plenty of games where you draw it on turn 5 and it sucks, you draw it on turn 6 and it sucks, and that is a legitimate cost to actually putting this card in your deck. So, how good is it actually? Supergiant is, I think, the hardest of these cards to evaluate. The other cards are a lot easier to understand where they might be good. Supergiant is totally contextual. This card could be amazing. It could also be very, very useless. And I think that the delta between it is what makes it such an exciting card for me personally. Luckily for Supergiant, she is in one of the most stacked caches we've had in a long time. Yep, she is in a cache with Zabu. I think it would not be a stretch to say that Zabu is the single best card in Series 4 and Series 5. His only real competition for that title is Thanos, and his only real competition for best card in the game is Shang-Chi, a card that he improves to a great degree. Zabu is one of the single best cards in the game. He is an easy pickup whenever you get the chance. He is one of the few cards that is worth picking up for tokens, let alone for caches, and his presence in this cache makes it a slam dunk acquisition for basically anyone who doesn't have this card. Zabu is that dude, or perhaps I should say that cat. Probably the best card in the game. Discounting your 4s is incredibly meaningful, and the reason 4 discounting is so meaningful is that 4s, it seems to me at least, were explicitly designed to win the game. So when you think about how Marvel Snap is supposed to happen, you're really only supposed to play one 4-cost card, and then a 5-cost card, and then a 6-cost card. 4s aren't necessarily balanced by the fact that you are not able to play 2 of them in one turn because they cost 4. And 3s are sort of held down because you can play 2 of them in one turn on the final turn of the game because they cost 3. And Zabu, of course, totally inverts this. I think it pushed the designers to make 3 drops a little bit weaker to sort of compensate for that, to make sure that it wasn't something that could get overpowered. And it pushed them to make 4 drops stronger. And Zabu inverting that dynamic, allowing you to play multiple 4 drops on the final turn of the game, is ridiculous. Another issue that 4 drops have is that they have to compete with Shang-Chi and Enchantress whenever they come out, so that leads to this natural level of power creep, where if a 4-drop can't compete with some of the best cards in the game, it can't be playable at its own cost, and Zabu just exacerbates that. This card is unbelievable for a variety of reasons. Easy slam dunk pickup. As if it wasn't enough that Zabu was in these caches, Zabu's running mate, Darkhawk, is also in these caches. Now, Zabu has sort of gone, beyond Darkhawk. They used to be super tight, and now Zabu has a lot more friends than just Darkhawk. But Darkhawk is still the OG pair with Zabu. Most Darkhawk decks, if not all of them, are going to run Zabu, and that means that this is the opportune time for you to pick up both of them at the same time, while also getting access to what is potentially the weirdest card of the month in Supergiant. Even if she isn't that good, you're gonna be fine because you got Zabu and Darkhawk. This is a cache that I would say is on par with any we've had before, maybe even better than any we've had before in the current context of the metagame. The only thing I'd be worried about at this point is it's become increasingly clear to me that Zabu is a significant balance issue. And I think the issue here would be it's such a balance issue that they might actually have to do something about it. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I am saying that the only thing that could make this a bad cache is if they do something about Zabu that makes it a lot worse. And the kind of things they would have to do to make Zabu a lot worse are drastic, and I don't think those are the steps they're going to take. But I do think it is a strong enough card that I would be being irresponsible by saying, oh yeah, slam dunk, always buy this, if I didn't tell you that, like, it's actually so good that it could be on the chopping block at some point. That is something to be concerned with. However, I do think that it is still just a ridiculously good cache. I would compare it to the cache that had Nebula and High Evolutionary in it alongside Kyera in the previous month. This is that, but better. You get Zabu, you get Darkhawk. That's a huge leg up on basically all of your competition at almost every collection level range, unless you already have all these cards. Next up is Cull Obsidian, aka that guy who got his arm cut off by a portal in Avengers Infinity War, and then he got, like, dragged around the entire Wakandan shield. Got kind of an unceremonious end. Infinity War spoilers, I suppose. This is a big dumb idiot, and as a big dumb idiot myself, this is one of my favorite cards of the month, if not my favorite card of the month, because it is just exactly the kind of stupid crap I like doing. But let's talk about what he actually is. This is a 4/10 with an ability that restricts your ability to play it. Now, what that ability means is that you have to have a 1-cost card where you play Cull Obsidian. However, you can play that 1-cost card and then put Cull Obsidian into a location, which means this is a much less restrictive clause than it otherwise might seem to be. I do think that is a significant buff to how this card reads, because this card reads as, oh, okay, you can only play where you have a 1-cost card, which means you're telling your opponent where it is. It's kind of like Crossbones but bigger. That's not very good. However, Cull Obsidian being able to be staged next to a staged 1-cost card, so you can play like Yondu, Cull Obsidian, same lane, same turn, that's a really big deal. And of course, the main thing that I kind of want to see this guy in is Thanos. I am interested in a 4/10 in Thanos because it's already a deck that uses Scar very well. Specifically, this card being 4/10 instead of 4/9, it might strike you as a downgrade because now it can die to Shang-Chi, and that is actually, you know, that is an important thing to be a downgrade. Like, that does matter. However, A, you are Shang-Chiing my 4-drop. I'm good with that. B, I am using that 4-drop to effectively accelerate out a Scar. So you end up in a scenario where, yes, you are vulnerable to Shang-Chi. However, you're going to be putting a lot more stats on the board alongside this guy. And I think part of the reason Thanos doesn't play 4s is because they're not big enough. Because when you roll the average 4 out of a Lockjaw, you're like kind of sad about it. You're not sad to see this guy roll out of a Lockjaw the same way you're not sad to see a Scar roll out of a Lockjaw. There's a 1-point difference between this card and Scar is a card that usually is only getting discounted to like 4 anyway. So this is how I understand this guy. I'm also interested to see what he does in a Zoo shell. I think Zoo has often lacked the ability to just be like, you know, I really need a bunch of points here. And this guy costing 4 makes me want to investigate things like, you know, Zabu, Squirrel Girl, Shauna, Khazar, and then your 4-drop slot is like Shang-Chi, Cull Obsidian, and Khazar. And that's probably enough to justify running Zabu. And I think that is a big buff for an archetype that otherwise, A, tries to like opt against tech, which I think is kind of a mistake, and B, now has the ability to not just target lanes where your opponent has a big guy with a Shang-Chi, but you can actually just put your own big guy out there. And I think that's pretty cool too. I think Zoo has like sneakily gotten a lot of tools, and it's the kind of deck I like playing. I'm not saying it's going to be good. What I am saying is I probably will play this guy in it alongside the Zabu stuff, because I think we all know at this point, like Zabu and tech cards and some like that's a good recipe. The question is if Zoo can rise out of the soup of decks that are doing that. And I don't think this guy like moves that needle to the degree that it would need to be, but he does make me excited for an archetype that basically has never been good. And so I do appreciate that about him. Alongside Cull Obsidian in the caches are going to be Nimrod, first of all, and Nimrod is a mediocre card with a lot of not necessarily untapped potential, but legit good strategy that just never seems to have the right time. It's never the right time to do Nimrod stuff because the Nimrod decks that are good tend to be things along the lines of Shuri Nimrod. That's a very strong way of presenting a deck that does not get blown the hell out by Shang-Chi, and in fact loves when your opponent tries to be a Shang-Chi deck because, hey, that's more Nimrods for me. However, that has only ever really been a metagame force in like these backup plan Phoenix Force decks, things of that nature, and Nimrod, while that is a powerful combo, the general idea is you go Shuri into Nimrod into, say, Carnage and Venom, or Deathlock and Venom, or really Deathlock and Carnage would work too, but you really want the Venom in there. Just make sure you get one big lane. You can target all three like that. It's a combo deck, and right now, as a combo deck, it has less natural counters, but it also has less actual power, and I think that it is in this awkward spot where that is kind of the only thing Nimrod does well, and it's not well positioned right now, but I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have in your back pocket. If you like, this isn't like a card that you should avoid picking up if you're interested in the other stuff here, but this is not a card that should move the needle in terms of should I get these caches. This is not a card that should be regarded as anything other than filler, in my opinion, despite the fact that there are some interesting ways to use it right now. It should not be considered a needle mover. You should not be opening these for this. You should be opening these for this. Now, Thanos is probably the only card that legitimately competes with Zabu in terms of being a metagame build around. He's a phenomenal, amazing card. I very much enjoy playing Thanos. I think a lot of high-level players also enjoy playing Thanos. I am excited for his current position, and obviously this is the Thanos season, and I'm not really sure any of these cards are super making a big difference in Thanos. If any of them do, I would actually expect it to be Cull Obsidian. And that it means that it's good that he's in this week, because this will allow people to experiment with Thanos, experiment with Cull Obsidian, figure out if they like that, and yes, this is a good week because Thanos is in it. No, this isn't as good a week as the Supergiant week. Zabu Darkhawk is better than Thanos Nimrod. Like, that is hard for me to argue, because both of those cards are good, but Thanos is a great pickup for basically anyone who does not own the card. Cull Obsidian is a card I'm excited to try in those kind of shells, and Nimrod kind of sucks. That's fine. But this is still a good set of cards for these caches. I get it, it's not as good as the Zabu one, but this is as good as any we've had in a while, I think, in my opinion. It's got my favorite card of the season in it. Obviously, that is not a guarantee of power. Just to be clear, my favorite card is not necessarily the strongest card, it's just the one that appeals to me the most. Obviously, the guy who's all raw power appeals to me a lot. Thanos, on the other hand, is a great card. Phenomenal. You're not going to regret picking him up. He is one of the best build-arounds in Marvel Snap. He has been broken 3 separate times. He has had multiple nerfs applied to him, and he is still coming back for more. I just hit the mic to emphasize that. I'm lying. I hit it accidentally, but it is nice that it emphasized that at the same time. Next up is Corvus Glaive, a 3/5 with an on-reveal ability that discards 2 cards from your hand and perpetually gives you +1 maximum energy. Now, the natural comparison people want to make with this is Electro, right? So Electro is a card that a 3/2 ongoing ability, you can only play 1 card each turn, but you get perpetually 1 maximum energy. Now, one thing that Corvus Glaive does have as a big advantage is that being a 3/5 does matter. That is a sincerely large buff, 3/2 to 3/5. One of the issues that he has, though, is I find it hard to find a deck that actually is good and wants to do this. So my first thought process with Corvus is, can I do like the X23 deck where like I kind of want to discard my own stuff with Dakin and stuff like that, but then it's like, okay, well, I played Dakin and this guy does nothing. And so my second thought process is like, okay, can I play him in discard? Because we know X23 going to getting 7 energy on the final turn of the game was really critical for Destroy being good. It allowed for Deadpool and Null, but it just doesn't matter to discard. It doesn't matter at all. That 7 energy does nothing. You were doing the same things that you would otherwise be doing, and so it just sort of doesn't really do anything in traditional MODOK discard either. Now, there is a deck that I think could use this plausibly, and that is Hela, because it's a deck that, okay, I'm playing this, I'm discarding my guys, I get to play my Hela out early, that could be good, who knows? I get to play my, if I discard, like, my Hela or something, I can still just be a ramp deck, and that's not, like, actually all that bad. Like, I could just, like, be a deck that is ramping, and then, you know, when I don't discard my Hela, I just kill you. But I don't think that deck needs this, if that makes any sense. Like, that deck is actually very well built. There's a lot of good targeted discard in there. A lot of what that deck is just, do you get the Hela? And it's very good at doing that. And it's a much more consistent deck than people give it credit for. And I think that for that reason, Corvus Glaive doesn't even really make much sense there. So when I talked to Lambie Series about it, one place he thinks it might make sense is in just like a typical ramp deck where you just run this card, Electro, Wave, a bunch of 5s, a bunch of 6s. That's the whole deck. And while I do think that might work, I don't think it will be good. Because when you think about what that deck is doing, it's effectively doing similar stuff to what Thanos is doing, but it's doing it in a much more clunky and awkward way. Yeah, okay, you played a 5-drop on 4 and then a 5-drop on 5. Wow, cool. I mean, like, Thanos does that with Lockjaw, and it's probably better, and they're also Thanos. And the issue I have with this guy is, if he does go in that archetype, he's like the worst of the ramp pieces. Worse than Electro, worse than Wave, probably. And I just find it hard to believe that that really moves the needle for that kind of deck. That kind of deck is fine. It's not bad because it doesn't work, right? Like, it's not bad because you die when you don't have the ramp. It's bad because you can die when you do. Like, when you're ramping this stuff up, you're not doing things that are twice as good as what your opponent is doing. You're doing things that are like, you know, one step above the curve, which means it's like, it's weirdly difficult for those decks to like compete on power or play the right tech cards, and they kind of get run over by like combo decks. And like, there's this whole weird thing that ramp decks do that I feel like prevents them from being legitimate threats. And the last time they was a very different metagame. It was a Sandman type thing. And I shudder to think about playing this guy in my Sandman deck, discarding my Sandman, and instantly losing what is a matchup that I'm supposed to win because of my Sandman. I don't see it with him. I would like to believe that I'm wrong because he is a card that excites me. He's a card that makes a lot of, like, I want him to work. I think this would be cool because if you can turn that downside into an upside, it's the sickest card of all time. It's aggressively costed at 3-5, but I just can't find a deck that actually turns that downside into an upside. And I think the closest I can get is some sort of like mid-range soup swarm type deal. And that sounds awesome, but those decks want to play specific tech cards and he discards those. And it's just, it's close. And that might be good enough, but that type of deck would use X23, but like, that's also sort of weird, right? Because like, I've discarded my X23, which gives me extra energy, and then my Corvus Glaive gives me extra energy, and I don't use it all because I have too much energy, and I built the rest of my deck to be playable otherwise. Like, I don't know. I want it to work really badly. I think the fact that X23 is in the caches is indicative of them thinking, okay, this is the kind of deck I want to work well with this as well, but I can't figure out how it would work. It's going to be what I'm going to try to do, but I can't figure it out right now for sure. X23 is a destroy staple and should be graded as such until further notice. This is a card that is a incredibly important piece of the destroy archetype, the card that moved it to legitimate meta relevance back when it first came out. X23 is required in destroy because destroy is mostly balanced by the fact that its major payoff, Deadpool, is the card you need to have in your opening hand at the beginning of the game. And when you only have one of those, the deck is just not reliable enough to run. However, X23 is your second Deadpool. It allows you to start just ramping up, doing things that are generally powerful. Obviously, you know, they're not as strong as the Deadpool stuff, but you're still doing good stuff. You're getting ahead of the curve. You're playing stuff. You're doing strong things. X23 second Deadpool, you probably can't play the deck without it. When we talked about the Corvus Glaive issue in the ramp deck already has two cards that it really needs to draw, Wave and Electro, right? A third one is helpful, but not as helpful as going from 1 to 2. The biggest thing any deck can get is when there is one card that is really important in the early game, a second copy of it, which is effectively what X-23 is the most important thing it can possibly get. A third copy, a lot less important. Right now, X-23 is that second copy of Deadpool. If you plan on playing Destroy, this is a card you need to pick up. So, as always, I'm using DATAMINES to make this video, and actually two sites disagree about what the third card in this cache is going to be, but I believe the more reputable of them, Snap.fan, says that it is Gladiator, so we're going with that. For the record, the other site says it is Stature. Gladiator is a great card right now, an extremely powerful and useful 3-drop, and I think indicative of many of the issues with 3-drops, because Gladiator at 3/8 is almost twice as big as the other 3-drops that typically see play, and I think that is a really severe issue, in my opinion. We touched on it with Zabu. A lot of people look at Zabu as the reason that 3-drops are bad, and Zabu's not the reason 3-drops are bad. Obviously, I think he exacerbates the situation, but I think the reason 3-drops are bad is that the base 3-drop is a 3/4, and the base 4-drop is a 4/6, but when you look at the base 3-drop as a 3/4, 3s are actually, like, pretty close to that. Like Mobius is a 3/3, for example. Luke Cage is a 3/4 with upside. And then you look at 4s, and the average 4 that actually sees play is like a 4/12. There's like Darkhawk that's a 4/12. Wolf, you got Sentry that's arguably a 4/20 when you combine it with an Annihilus. You got things like Shang-Chi and Enchantress, which get like well above 4/12 rate most of the time. Like when you play Shang-Chi, it's at least the 4/13 if you're actually playing the guy. And so the gap between 3s and 4s is that 3s are actually pretty close to their baseline, and 4s are so far removed from their vanilla stat line that it's actually kind of a joke. And Gladiator is the only 3-drop that is costed the way like the average 4-drop that sees play is, basically. Like, Gladiator is the only card that's like, yeah, no, actually, this is just 2 times the vanilla stat line, and that's what it takes. And yep, that's what it takes. Gladiator as a 3/8 is a phenomenal card. Yes, you know, there's randomness. Yeah, no, I get it. But he's 2 times the vanilla stat line. That's really all you need to know. This dude's big as hell. However, I do think they are making, you know, correct moves with regards to this imbalance between 3s and 4s. We saw Ghost as a 3/5 with upside. We saw Black Swan as a 3/5 with upside. And I do want to say right now, people are talking about like, ooh, power creep. My response to that, good. They need to power creep 3s badly. This, like, the fact that Gladiator is like so far and away the best 3 is a ridiculous and absurd state of affairs, and it's not Zabu's fault. It's the fault of those baselines. Every 4 that sees play is like twice as good as the vanilla stat line at 4. There are almost no 3s that are twice as good as the vanilla stat line at 3. Basically none of them. And I think that power creep cannot come soon enough. I think you could probably give every 3-cost card +1 power. I know people are going to be like, what about Brood? What about Cerebro? What about Mystique? Yeah, okay, there's like probably 5 of them you can't. But pretty much all of them except Gladiator and, you know, the current crop of 3/5s, even them they probably could probably get +1 power. And it would be like fine for the game. So this cache is actually also pretty reasonably solid, although I will say it is more carried by X-23 and Gladiator than anything else. These are solid cards that are worth picking up. X-23, especially if you're a Destroy fan, is going to be worth picking up. Gladiator is just a generically strong and good 3-drop right now, and there just are basically none of those, so it goes in a lot of just points-centric decks. And I think that's a fair place for Gladiator to be. It's just probably the best in slot. Like the Doctor Doom of 3-drops, where it's like, you know, you're not always running it and everything, but when you need a 3-drop, this is probably the guy, unless you have a good compelling reason not to run it. And I think that is a good place for it to be. X-23, of course, a Destroy staple. If you are interested in playing a Destroy deck, you will need to pick up X-23. Of course, you know, by a Destroy deck, I mean the Destroy deck. She doesn't go in every Destroy. She probably does, actually, but like the other ones aren't worth investing in. Gladiator, of course, most points decks are going to be playing this guy. As far as Corvus Glaive, I still don't get him, but if someone is able to turn him into a 3/5 with upside, he could be so strong. Like, that's the thing with this guy, is like, if I can figure out how this guy can be all upside, he's one of the best cards I've ever seen, but I can't do it. And so he's a huge question mark for me. And I think that this is still a good cache because of the power of the other cards in it. But I'm very much not putting a lot of weight on him because I don't want to tell you to get the cache because of him, because I'm not positive that'll work out for you. Proxima Midnight, a 4/7, we'll see if I remember to fix that in post, is a card that when discarded, she will jump to your lowest power location. And I think the way to think about her is Big Wolverine. That's how I would consider her in a destroy deck. I mean, I think this card is strong, but I'm not sure how it works well. Like, being strong is one thing. 3 points is extremely, extremely valuable, and I'm sure there's going to be something unfair to do with her. The question I have is, what deck can do this? And I think the kind of deck that can do this is like a Dakin type Black Bolt, Silver Samurai, Stature, like fair cards deck. And that kind of deck is going to be like, okay, I get a free Proxima Midnight. I get a bunch of tech cards, Shang-Chi Enchantress. It'll be that kind of deck. That's the kind of deck I would want to play her in. But there's like an outside chance that it's like, okay, so you just throw her in to destroy or discard, and then it's like, I MODOK'd a 7 power dude. And that's pretty good too. Like, just getting a free 7 power card is quite powerful. The fact that you know where it's going makes it, I think, significantly stronger than Wolverine in discard shells, and obviously the fact that it is significantly larger goes a long way towards helping that as well. I am excited for this card. I really cannot wait to see what people do with it. I would say it's probably my second most, like, I want to figure out what this guy is kind of cards. I mean, this girl is, I suppose. Apologies to Proxima Midnight. Please don't kill me. This is a card I'm very excited to play with. I find it hard to guess at power level because of how context dependent she is. In a metagame where 7 points is very impactful, so like mid-range mirrors, she could be absolutely amazing. In a metagame where 7 points is not very impactful, so you're a mid-range deck, you're going up against something that's just like Hela or whatever. It's like, okay, she'd be good, but like not like necessarily worth going out of your way to get in your deck. And I think that's going to be what determines how playable she is she worth all the sacrifices in deck building that you have to make her make sense? And making those sacrifices in deck building is her major cost. Once she's in the deck, once you're doing all the things that you need to do to enable her reliably, then she obviously makes a ton of sense in decks like that. But whether or not those decks end up being worthwhile compared to other mid-range competitors, I think is another thing entirely. Now, one interesting thing that I kind of am interested in figuring out with her is, like, is there a Black Knight thing here? Is there a Hela thing here? Is there something we can do along those lines where it's just like, that deck's already doing a lot of that stuff, so like, I could play like a Silver Samurai, the rest of my hand is like 6 drops, and I get a free 4/7. Is that a thing that could work? I don't know. She kind of gets my gears spinning though, and I think that's an important thing for a new card to do. MODOK is the most traditional discard card that there is. He is a staple of the discard archetype. He is the staple of the discard archetype, and you basically don't play the discard archetype without him. Well, I should say the traditional discard archetype, you know, Apocalypse and all that stuff. And Proxima Midnight probably does find a slot in there just because, you know, playing a MODOK and getting a free 7 power dude is pretty damn solid. And I think that that is like the base level of Proxima Midnight. If that's all she's doing, I don't really think it's enough, but it is good. And I do think that MODOK, of course, is worth picking up if you're a discard fan, but he is worse than other like capstone or archetype cards like X23 because discard is worse than destroy. I feel like Dakin is just like such a victim of like how stringent they are with 3 drops compared to 4 drops, because like this is a guy who is, if you'll pardon my Chris Collinsworth, now here's a guy who there's no reason why he couldn't be a 3/5. And I just, yeah, I don't know why he has to be a 3/4, because it's like, okay, well, you're effectively going to spend 4 energy most of the time to like get rid of the guy in your hand, or like play it and kill it off or whatever. And it's like, he's underpowered is really what I'm getting at. Like, now here's a guy who's significantly underpowered. And I do think that he is a cool and nice card. And if you can free roll the discard and turn the downside into an upside. There are cool things you can do. I actually really recommend what a player named Owi has done with this, OWI. I believe he's a streamer, but he is French, if I'm not mistaken, so might not be for everyone just in terms of the language barrier there. However, he's been really pushing that archetype, in my opinion, forward. I've been keeping an eye on it, especially with Corvus and Proxima coming out. Dakin is sort of his baby. I would keep an eye on what he's doing. And of course, Dakin as a card is fine in discard. It's not really up to par in destroy, and I think that sort of illustrates the issue with it, because it's like destroy's the one of those decks that's actually good, and there's a reason why Dakin isn't up to par in it, and it's because Dakin's not. So he's not really a big draw for me in this cache. As far as the cache itself, I would suggest that unless Proxima Midnight is really strong, this is probably the weakest cache of the bunch. The Zabu and Thanos caches are, I think, the highlights of them, and the X23 cache has some real solid role players in it. This one just kind of doesn't. This is the biggest dud of all of these caches, in my opinion. I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but I do worry about what that may mean for Proxima Midnight, because she's a cool, exciting card, and I don't like that she's getting such a worse cache than all the rest of these, because I would say by far the other three caches are significantly better than this one. Like, they have like maybe one miss in it. And I think you could reasonably look at this cache and say, if Proxima Midnight is a miss, this has 3 misses in it. And there is no cache other than that that is like anywhere close to that bad. Even the Corvus Glaive cache, X23, is a good card that is worth picking up. And there is just like, and Gladiator is a good card that is worth picking up. And both X23 and Gladiator are better than Dakin and the other card in this cache. Oh my god, I'm blanking on it, but it's definitely worse. Oh yeah, it's MODOK. But yeah, like it's a significant gap even between this and the next worst cache. This is probably the worst one by a significant margin and needs to be hard carried by Proxima in order to end up being good. So, best caches ranking time. It's actually pretty difficult to stack rank these, of course, and please do keep in mind that everything in this video is from DATAMINES and is subject to change. If you get mad at me for a DATAMINE video, I encourage you to please not do that. I will cry. Second, I would like to note that because each person's collection is different, you do not need to take this stack ranking as gospel. You should take it and then apply it to what you already have. If my stack ranking relies heavily on Zabu being a really good card and you already have Zabu, well, yeah, that cache gets a lot worse if you already have Zabu. So please understand that. With that said, stack ranking for this one, it's actually chronological. Number 1 is the first cache, Supergiant, Zabu, and Darkhawk. Number 2 is the second cache, mostly on the strength of Thanos. Number 3 is the third cache, X23, doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Gladiator doing a lot of heavy lifting there. And number 4 is the fourth cache, which, as we discussed, is bad. So, I hope you enjoyed that look at the month of February in Marvel Snap. I hope it was helpful to you. Remember to like, leave a comment, all those things, subscribe, do the things that make my dopamine chemicals go burr. Haven't done that in a while. As always, I've been KM Best. You've been slightly worse than that. I will see you in the next one. Do you like that? I got it from like a YouTube comment. Someone said I should say that. I'm trying it out. Let me know what you think.